Okay, hello and welcome back. Let's see, how do I need to adjust myself here? All right, so we're going to continue on with the runes here today. And the idea here is to go a little bit deeper with the runes. You know, we've done a lot of work on this Patreon channel. By the way, if you're new to this Patreon page, the way to get the most out of it is to scroll all the way to the bottom first. When you get to the bottom of the page, at least on a desktop, I don't know what happens on an iPad or a phone, but on a desktop, it'll say more or more videos. And then you just keep clicking that and keep scrolling down until you get to the bottom. And then just start from there. That's where all the meat is. You've got to get that, that basis. You got to get that foundation moving. And then we go up and we do a lot of intense work. And then now I thought it would be, you know, good to continue to work. I have like chocolate on my face. Look at that. Got some chocolate on my face from my protein drink. All right, there you go. You get to see the Thunder Wizard in all of his glory. So yeah, so we're working with the runes. And the idea now is to go deeper into the runes, but to get the most out of it. And again, to get the most out of all of this is to take advantage of all of the materials I have available. You know, I probably, you know, maybe I could do things differently by being very clear about read this book and then do this and just be one of those teachers that tells you exactly what to do all the time. But you know, I've always been the kind of person that I want to give people what I would want. And what I would want is I would want to have a ton of material to look at. And I would want to focus on the things that you know, spoke to me and that I had interests in. And then I would want to go deeper into those things. So that's what I'm trying to do here with you. So we're talking about the runes again, and we're on the second 8 of the runes, and we're talking about JERA, the rune of cooperation and relationship. And so we're going to be talking about that. This is an interesting rune, and where it's placed I find is interesting. So before I do any of that, let me just make sure you know what the education materials, the study materials are here. We've got 3 books for runes: Rune Shamanism, Rune Divination, and Advanced Rune Shamanism. And let me see, I think I have them all here. And that's these books here. Advanced Rune Shamanism is probably the most helpful because we're now going to be analyzing the runes in the rune wheel and specifically relationships to other runes. And again, the more that I keep working with the rune wheel, again, I'm just like you. Look, I am learning continuously about this that's been transmitted to me. You know, these are like compasses. These are like maps. They're you know, they're never ending. And so even though I've been given the opportunity and the privilege or whatever to synthesize this information and sort of put this together, like you, I am poring over it and learning all the time. So I guess I'm also sharing with you my take on things, you know, as things continue to move. There you go. Now you feel sick, right? There you go. Is it flat? Oh, well. Me and technology, boy. All right, so let us now take a look at JERA on the rune wheel, which will be in the southeast. Okay, so the first thing I like to do is I like to talk about the relationship of the rune that we're focusing on in connection to the rune that we've just had and the rune that's coming up. So again, this is on the second 8, and as we know, the second 8 is about psychological transformation. And so we have to look at this rune in this way. And what's interesting about that is that, speaking for myself, you know, if I didn't have the rune wheel, or if I was given the runes and knowing what I know about the thunder wheel, if somebody were to just tell me to arbitrarily place the runes without knowing any better, I probably would have put JERA in the west, because the west is the realm of the Vanir, the Wanes, the gods of fertility. You know, because lots of times in readings, JERA, in my experience, will mean committed relationship or marriage, because it's from marriage that you get children, right? So that's where I would have put it. So when, again, I constructed this rune wheel for the first time, and I just simply took them, the runes in their original form, and just put them, you know, in 8, you know, 1, 2, 3, on top of each other like that. JERA ended up in the southeast. So that was interesting. The southeast is a very mysterious realm. And so for me, when I look at runes in the southeast, there's some really deep and complex meanings, because the southeast has to do with an aspect of the lower self, specifically the subconscious mind. You know, we've got the subconscious and the unconscious. So remember, the subconscious, if we're looking at the iceberg scenario example, then you've got the top, whatever, 5% or whatever it is. That's your conscious mind. That's what you're aware of. That's your intellect. And then you have the subconscious mind, which is right at water level. And at water level, obviously, you've got a larger mass, and it's the part of the iceberg that rises and falls up at the level of the ocean, right? So that's a lot more than the conscious mind can handle. So it stores all this information in there. And then, of course, you got the unconscious, which is what we are not aware of, because we just don't have, it would be impossible for us to be aware of everything that's in our unconscious mind all the time. We just wouldn't be able to function, which is probably, you know, if we were to talk about people with, you know, some real serious mental issues like schizophrenia or something like that, we might have to say that maybe they have difficulty cordoning off their unconscious mind, and so they just can't function. So yeah, JERA. So let's look at JERA in connection to the previous rune, which was Isa. So Isa is in the east, and Isa is the realm of identity, and we talked about you can't have an identity until you create boundaries, which is what Thurisaj is in the physical realm. And then you have Isa, which is the psychological realm. And then what's interesting is we go right from Isa, the rune of self, the rune of how you feed yourself. We go from that rune directly into the rune of relationship, of interconnected relationship. And so that gets me thinking in a lot of, you know, again, you know, a lot of these platitudes, you know, as corny as they are when looked at superficially, there's some truth to them, or they wouldn't be platitudes. And one platitude is, you can't know another person until you know yourself. You can't love another person until you love yourself. So we go right into what the psyche wants to do when it first gains an experience of itself, is it wants to share itself. And think about it, isn't that what, you know, relationships are? You go out on a first date with somebody, and what ends up happening is you're talking about each other. Well, what do you like to do? Well, what do you like to do? Well, you know, and then you know, ideally you're saying, wow, they're so interesting, and they're saying to you, wow, you're so interesting. And so, you know, you're sharing yourself with somebody, and you're seeing yourself ideally being reflected back to you in an ideal fashion. You get to see, you know, what we want out of relationships is we want to see the best in ourselves. And we want to have somebody who will reflect back to us the best of ourselves, so we can feel better about ourselves. And in the process, we make them feel good about themselves. And then, you know, we walk around thinking to ourselves, wow, I've got a really great partner, but it's still kind of a reflection on you, you know, who your partner is, you know. I've got one of the most unique girlfriends I think that's ever existed. In that when we go out in public, if I get attention from females, she loves it, and she loves it because she then walks away feeling good about herself, saying, "Look at the guy I have. Look at all these girls." You know, not saying that happens all the time, but you know when it does. So let's look at JERA again in connection to that. You go from yourself to communication with another person. And the realm of the southeast is the realm of communication. And so we move from self-involvement to connection to others, which has to do with communication. And what's interesting is that the way you construct a JERA rune is you take two Kenaj runes and turn them in on each other. And so we were just talking about that. It's getting to know, you're getting to know the other person while they're getting to know you. You're also getting to know yourself. So it's a rune of self-knowledge. And even though, you know, it's a cooperation with another person, I mean, it's still a little bit narcissistic in that you're creating a bubble with another person. Now, this doesn't have to be limited to one person. It can be a group of people coming together. You know, JERA means year, and it has to do with how each of the months interlock with each other to create this progression, to create this kind of evolution. But let's just take a look at how JERA is constructed by two Kenaj runes, and let your mind just wander on that. And we'll just, again, if you want to, take a look and see how it reflects, you know, in a connection this way, and how it reflects, you know, with other runes around this way in the circle. So take a look at that. Okay, so now I just saw something interesting. See, you know, part of what I'm doing in this is I am sharing with you how I learn, how I study. You know, I am not here claiming that I have everything, that I know everything there is to know. This thunder path is interesting for me because it's not something I've completely mastered and it's just boring for me. I'm learning with you, and so you know you have your own process of learning, but I want to show you here's how I learn. Here's how I'm studying this. So first thing I do is now we've looked at what's preceding it, which is Isa. Now we go look at what's next. What the next rune is from from JERA, which is Yuhuaj, the rune of it's the rune of conflict and the rune of transformation. We'll get into that, but it's the rune of conflict, and it's a, you know, it's the kind of conflict that you don't have a choice about. So we've talked about this. Hagel is the voluntary choice to transform yourself. Yuhuaj is involuntary. It's when it feels to you like the universe is deciding, okay, it's time to transform you, and you have to go through the shamanic, you know, transformation from death to life. So, you know, again, we're talking about relationships, and you go, the first part of the relationship is the phase where you know you project all of your fantasies onto the other person, and you become infatuated with each other, and then and then you really, you know, get together and you connect, you get to know each other, and you merge with each other, and you know you throw your projections at each other, and then the next thing is conflict. You know, I may have shared this before, but years ago, I don't know, it was like 30, 25 or 30, dating a girl, and as is my wont, you know, I'm a very emotional guy. I love to communicate. And you would think, oh, all women love that. Well, no, not all women love that. Some women, you know, like some guys just don't have that desire or ability to communicate on a deep level. And so, you know, I was a problem for this one particular woman I was dating. And so I thought, well, let's go to couples counseling. That might be a good idea. And so we're in the session, and she says, you know, Mike and I are always fighting, and I never had these problems with my ex-boyfriend. And the therapist says, that's why you're not with him. Because you can't get to know somebody without arguing. It's part of the process, because then what happens is you get out of your narcissism, and you have to accept the humanity of the person that's opposite you. And there's the conflict. And then you learn to compromise, and you learn to get out of yourself, and you learn to truly give to somebody else. And that is a difficult process. So this is interesting. We see this chain of events. We go from it's all about me to it's all about us to it's all about what's happening here. Who are you? Who am I? All that. So we get conflict. Anyway, so that's how I like to look at it. So now I'm going to do look at it a different way, which is I want to look at the runes in connection to them. You know, there's a rune on each side, on the first aid and the third aid. And so let's take a look at that, and let's examine what that means. Okay, so again, I'm looking at this for the first time with you. Every time I do this, in fact, every time I look at these things, I learn new stuff. So we've got Ansuz, and then we have JERA, and then we have Manaj. So those are the three runes that are in the southeast, the dwarf home, the realm of the subconscious, the realm of the human realm is what it's called. That's why this is such an interesting realm, and that's why if you look at all of the runes here, there's this dynamic of interconnection. So Ansuz is the God mouth, and it means it has to do with communication. So on one level, it means that on the physical level, when we get to this realm, we have to listen. We have to listen to, if we're going back to me, when I look at the runes, I always, this is in my chart because I have multiple planets retrograde, which means I'm looking into the past all the time. So when I look at the runes and I try and put myself into what the runes mean, I always envision myself in Ice Age Europe. Running around with my tribal ancestors and skins and spears and whatever. And so the warrior, as he's learning the runes, on when he gets to the human realm, the first rune he has to learn is the rune of listening, communication, because communication is a two-way street. There's no point in communicating if you're not going to listen. And sometimes we have to listen first and then respond and communicate. So to me, it's the warrior has to listen, the hunter has to listen to nature. He has to listen to the earth, to the rocks, to the trees, to the snow, to the ice, to the animals, to the sky, to the weather. He has to listen to the smells, listen to the actual sounds. He has to feel. This is because nature is a doorway to the infinite. So this is what I see when I look at Ansuz. First thing that happens is that the first thing on the physical note is that the person has to listen. And that's a bodily thing. That's a bodily thing. This is important. Again, I've been teaching about how important it is to get into your body. This is why it's so important to do the energy work. We can sit around and talk all day, but it means nothing. I shouldn't say nothing. It doesn't mean nearly as much if you don't get into your body and out of your head. And you listen. Listen with your body. My African teacher, these men were amazing musicians. Amazing. A lot of them could pick up just about any instrument, even though they were drummers. They could pick up just about any instrument and play it. And without being taught. And so when you learned drumming the traditional way, it was by listening. And you learned, and the rhythms are so complex. I've talked about this before. To play the traditional African rhythms, it's not just one guy playing something, it's a bunch of rhythms that come together and intersect. It's a lot like JERA. And so even a master drummer, if there's some traditional playing going on, he'll sit and he'll listen, because he has to see how all of them are interconnecting, because some will be, a couple measures long, and one person will be playing this whole thing, which will be, really long. Something like that. So you have to be able to hear where everything goes and how you can fit in, and if you know what all the rhythms are for that particular piece, you can pick one. If you don't, then you have to create one which will fit. And he would say, you have to listen with your blood, because he would be, he'd be teaching Western musicians, trained Western musicians who knew how to look at, the chart with where the beats are, and they had to say, can you draw that out for me? And he'd say, no, I can't draw that out for you. And they'd say, is that in 6/8 or 4/4? And he'd say, I don't know, it sounds like this. And he would say, you have to listen with your blood. And I ran into that because I'm not classically trained at all. I can't, if somebody were to give me a chart with where all the notes are supposed to be and where all the, even if we're talking about percussion, I wouldn't know what the heck I was looking at. And what's interesting is that when people who trained that way, very intellectually, and if somebody were able to draw out on the map where all the, the notes were, the percussion, the timing, whatever, the measures, all that stuff, they could play it, they could replicate it, but it had this stiffness to it. And, it wasn't that they were wrong, it was just when they were playing, they were like robots. And there was no passion to it. And what was interesting for me is that when I would play, in, drum circles or whatever with these trained other drummers, and if there were Africans there, people from Africa, and they'd see us playing, I could see them always gravitating over to me, and they'd be whispering about, look at that guy. They knew that I knew what was going on here. And even though these other people were playing, they could tell the difference, because they could tell I was listening the way I was taught. I was listening with my blood. Of course, my body would do all kinds of weird, funky things too. Anyway, so the Ansu's rune is about listening as well as communicating. You have to be able to listen first, and from that listening, then you are able to have a relationship, the JERA. You're able to interconnect with somebody. And then it's not about you solely listening by yourself. Now it's about you and another person intercommunicating, getting to know each other. The Kenaj rune, getting to know each other. And then we go from JERA to Manaj, which is what? Manaj, the way that I have interpreted this, and I didn't even realize it until now, and now it makes a lot of sense. When I'm looking at readings, and let's say in a relationship, and somebody wants to know, well, how does this guy feel about me, and I'll take a reading on it. If Manaj comes up, what I say is, he feels a strong mental connection to you. Like you get him. He feels like he gets you. That's different than the communication. It's on a mental level, meaning the divine mind. This person is able to connect, and you guys share a connection. And Manaj is the rune of meditation. It means man, human, and it means moon, which is mind, not the intellect. The intellect picks things apart. That's what intellect means, to pick apart from among. That's what we do when we read. The root of lect is in there. It means to pick apart. When you're reading something, you're picking apart the symbols and the words and intellectually putting it back together again. It's not the intellect, it's the man, it's the mind. The mind reflects the soul. Reflect, meaning we spend time reflecting, meditating. Meditation is not just going empty. That's a misunderstanding. People try and empty their mind when their mind is full of crap. I mean, all you're going to do is, anyway, you're just going to smell the crap. No, you've got to reflect the soul, and you know, reflecting is an active process. It's not an analysis like the intellect does. It's a reflection. To reflect, it takes time. It takes, you know, you're intuitively connecting and reflecting on what does that mean, looking at it from multiple angles. When manage is reversed, it means the person can't see beyond the moment. They can't see things objectively. It's not like the same as being confused, it's just having a muddied perception. So the other result of JERA is then to go to the place of manage, mentally connecting, and you can even see it. It looks like two Wunjo runes, which are the rune of happiness and joy, which to me has a connection to love, not love like romantic love, but love like familial love, camaraderie, friendship. And here you have these two Wunjo runes coming together, and that creates manage, connection on the heart and the mental level, the emotional. Manage is emotion as well. So we have emotions in this area. So those, let me take a look. So those are some of my thoughts on the JERA rune. Now, what we do is we take a look at how it is across when we go from the southeast to the northwest. So let's just take a look at that for a moment. Okay, so here's something that I haven't noticed before. The Sawol rune, which is directly opposite it in the northwest, in the second 8, and the JERA rune are the same rune. You know, if you take the JERA rune and then just lengthen it like this, my hands aren't doing it so well, you have a Sawol rune. Isn't that interesting? So that explains to me that you're going from, because okay, so now we have to look at why this is. Again, this is just coming to me now. This isn't something I've thought about. I'm just becoming aware of this now. The right side of the rune wheel has to do with you, how you deal with yourself. The left side of the rune wheel has to do with how you deal with others. So if JERA is really, like I said, it's cooperation and relationship, but it still has that kind of narcissistic bubble around it. It's really kind of about you. If that isn't working, then you have to connect on a spiritual level, the soul level. And the soul level is when you are comfortable with yourself, then you can have a spiritual connection with somebody. Oh my gosh, this is blowing my mind right now. Was dealing with a client who was I don't know what word to use here because I don't want to give up any private information. In a relationship with somebody of the opposite sex, but it wasn't in a conventional way. And what this person wanted was commitment. This person had fallen in love and wanted commitment. And the other person was very into the first individual, but was not looking for a traditional committed relationship. And what they said is that they wanted a spiritual connection, and they really meant it. They really wanted a spiritual connection. Now, I don't know that I could do something like that. You know, you want to call it an open relationship or whatever you want to call it. I don't know that I could do that. But now I'm seeing what's happening here is that when this person was saying they wanted to connect, and they meant it, I want to connect on a spiritual level. It means it has to, it comes from without any personal agenda. Because when it comes to relationships, since we're talking about JERA, you know, when I'm dealing with people who relationships, you know, the majority of the phone calls I get have to do with relationships, not necessarily in the thunder path, but when I'm doing my counseling, my rune psychic work, it's almost always about relationships. And you know, when people are saying, what can I do to get this person to like me or whatever it is, and if it's in, you know, in the reading I see this kind of a thing, then what I'll say is, well, first off, are you capable of accepting that person exactly as they are? You know, knowing that they don't want the same kind of, you know, boundaries in the relationship that you do. And you have to be honest with yourself. If you can say, no, I can't deal with that, then you got to move on. No matter how painful it is, you got to move on. If you can say, yes, they're important enough to me that I can accept them exactly as they are, then you have to give unconditionally, without any expectation of, you know, commitment or whatever else. You have to give unconditionally. That's what this person was saying on a spiritual level. They wanted a complete spiritual union with that person. And whenever the other person would try and push them for a commitment, they felt constricted, and then they felt objectified. Isn't that weird? You know, we have to look at things from all angles. Again, I don't know that I could do it, but so what I'm trying to focus on here is that Sawol is a spiritual rune, meaning when you are connecting with somebody on a spiritual level, you're not doing it because of your own narcissistic agenda. And that's almost impossible to do in a romantic relationship, which is why JERA is on the right side. I mean, it's moving towards the left, but it's still on the right side, which means that we go into relationships, even if it's a cooperative relationship, like a work relationship, you know, when we're both together trying to make money. You don't want your business partner going and then trying to make money with somebody else doing the same thing and taking money away from you. You don't want to get into a romantic relationship with somebody who's going to then take that love and give it to somebody else. You want all of it for yourself. You know, there's a difference between friendship and romantic relationship, as you know. And, you know, again, I listen to this all day. You know, at least when business is good, I'm listening to people say, I gave him or her so much. I give so much. And I can hear in that, they're not saying they give. They're saying, I am giving, but, you know, I'm doing it because I want something back. You know, I give them all my time, or I do all of this for them. And that's because you want something back from them. You know, if you have your friend who really is just your friend, somebody that you know and is your friend, and you want the best for them, you love being with them and hanging out with them, but you only want the best for them. That person comes to you and says, hey, I'm going to take off for a year. I'm going to go find myself in Bolivia or whatever it is. Then you would go, wow, I'm really going to miss you, but have a great time. I want to hear all about it. You really want them to have a good time. But if it's your lover, forget about it. You're going away for a year? You're going to leave me alone for a year? You can't do that to me. It's almost impossible when we talk about unconditional love in romantic relationships. It's just a reality. You know, that's why people commit, because you become attached. And when you become attached, then you start to have a need. And we're talking about, again, romantic relationships, and there's a phrase that was taught to me by one of my teachers, which I love, which is, there's two kinds of relationships. Let's see if I got this right. There's two kinds. There's I love you because I need you, which is what most of us do, and that would be the less evolved way. I love you because I need you. You know, you get connected and then you need something from that person, which then creates a love. And then there's I need you because I love you. It starts out with an honest, not honest, I shouldn't say honest, they're both honest. It starts from a less selfish perspective. And you learn to love the other person, and that connection then creates a feeling of need, like you need them around. But in my experience, it's pretty much impossible to get into a romantic relationship without personal agenda. It's very difficult. But you know, some people work for it. You know, and you know, I could go on. Maybe I should go on and on about this since we're talking about relationships. Let's talk about open relationships. There have been people that I've known who call themselves polyamorous, which means that, you know, it means to love many. And what they'll say is, I have... Sorry, I'm laughing. What they'll say is, I have so much love within me that I can't be with just one person. And I remember there was a group of people, and we were, you know, a group of people would get together and work with each other, and, you know, basically hold space for each other as well as reflect back truth to each other to the best of our ability. And as this person was talking, my BS flags were going up. And it just sounded like somebody was justifying something. So I asked, okay, so, you know, in the way this person would describe it is, it was this beautiful, spiritual, you know, we're not into that selfish, and, you know, and so I go, okay, so how did you get into this? You know, and they were kind of cagey, and I, you know, and I can tell when somebody's avoiding. I'm pretty good at that. So I said, how does your partner, you know, I'm not going to, your spouse, how does your spouse feel about this? Oh, well, they're totally on board and they're doing it too. And, you know, it's tough for me sometimes, but I have to be. And I said, so, but whose idea was it? Because in my experience, this isn't true all the time, by the way. There are some people that are already into open relationships and they look for other people who are going to be that way. So this isn't always the case. But in my experience, what I've seen most of the time is that there's one person who wants an open relationship and one who doesn't. And so the one who wants it will, you know, couch it in a way like polyamory. You know, instead of saying I want an open relationship, I want to see other people, they'll say I'm polyamorous. Oh, I'm totally in love with you, but I can love them too. You're my primary relationship, but I'm having these other committed relationships on the side. And so I asked, you know, whose idea was it? And this person said it was theirs. And I said, so what happened? I mean, how did your spouse get on board with this? And then the truth came out. Truth came out is that this person was having an affair and felt guilty about it. And so had come to the conclusion that they were polyamorous, and they were going to thrust this polyamorous lifestyle onto their spouse. And so, and this person even said that I wouldn't let them leave. They were very upset, but I wouldn't let them leave. Like they stuck to the relationship, and this person was going to make this relationship work, you know, and they were proving to themselves. And so I said, so your spouse really didn't want to do this and was in love with you, and the thought of being without you was too painful. So in order to please you, they decided to be a part of this. And then I said, from my perspective, what it sounds like is that you really don't want to deal with the true intimacy of the relationship. And so as you get closer and closer to your spouse, it is frightening and uncomfortable because you're really having to look at yourself and your fear of intimacy and your father issues and, you know, feeling like you're going to be controlled and all these other things. I was trying to avoid revealing the sex of this person, but you can guess by now it was a woman. And she got very upset with me and, you know, was very threatened by me. And, you know, I just kept on saying, look, I'm not judging you, but let's just be real. You know, you wanted to have other relationships so that it would dissipate the intensity of the intimacy of your husband, who clearly loves you and wants to be only with you. And he didn't want to be without you. You even said that you forced him to stay with you, that you wouldn't let him leave. And I said, it sounds very controlling, which is a way to stay safe. Anyway, and so she just tore me a new one up and down and called me all kinds of names. And then, sure enough, 10 years later, she admits, yeah, that's exactly what was going on. I was afraid. So I guess, I don't know where, like, we're talking about relationships. And so I guess what I'm talking about here is that this is still on the right side. So what we call JERA, committed relationship, that like a marriage or like a business partnership, we still do it for our own personal needs. And it's important to understand that this is still coming from our need to be in relationship, because again, it's self-knowledge, having that person reflect back to you your ideal self so that you can go out. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful connection. It's a wonderful scenario. But that's how it's got to work. You got to understand that everybody's in it for themselves ultimately. So that's the difference. If we really truly get to the place where we really are without agenda, then our connection is going to be spiritual, and these Kenaj runes are going to move so that it becomes a Sawal rune. Again, I can't really do it with my hand here, but it'll turn into a Sawal rune. And I do believe that there are people out there, you know, who are able to do that. Again, I don't know that I could do it, but I do think there are people out there that could do that, that really are able just to connect with you on a soul level without any agenda. But that takes a very evolved person, and you know, that's why most of the time, you know, those kinds of relationships aren't romantic or sexual, because once you get sexual, you know, most of the time it's your agendas are going to come into it. It's pretty much, we're wired that way. You know, our millions of years of evolution have decided that the best way for the human race to procreate is when people make an exclusive union with each other and raise kids together, and all that makes for a better, you know, better survival, and makes for the likelihood of the human race to go on. But as we get into these modern times, it kind of changes the dynamic, because way back when, you know, you lived on a farm or you were a hunter-gatherer, you needed kids to help you. And you know, you think about it now, I mean, when you're in a relationship, everything is taken care of for us. Food preparation, I mean, really, yeah, if you want to be a chef, it's a hobby, but you don't need it. We already have, you know, food that's already pre-packaged and pre-prepared for us. And if you don't really need to cook your own food, you know, other than throwing it in the oven or, you know, the microwave, or, you know, whatever it is, or picking it up at, you know, now you can pick up, you know, from the grocery store, these really wonderful organic, you know, you don't need that anymore. But there was a time when, just to survive on a daily basis, you had to have somebody who was repairing the roof. You know, you repaired your own roof. You were, you know, making the this and then fixing the that, and then you had to chop the wood, and then you had to milk the cow, then you had to plant the crops, or you had to go out and hunt. And so even, you know, now, you know, we look at it now, you know, back then, back then you wanted a big burly wife. You didn't want a Melania Trump. You didn't want a swimsuit model. You know, you'd bypass those. You'd look for the big burly woman that's going to be able to chop wood and carry pots of water, and, you know, 2 babies at a time, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. You need somebody to help. So when you're doing all that work all day, right, it's kind of hard to go out and cheat on your spouse. Because at the end of the day, you're so freaking tired, you know. Then you have to get up and do it again the next day. So you really needed a partner to help you just to survive. So things are getting a little more complicated these days. But anyway, that's that. So let me take a look and see. Let me look at the rune wheel a little bit more and see what other thoughts I come up with. Okay, so the last thought that I have about this rune again is now I want to step back a little bit and look at its connection to its opposite. So we're in the dwarf home and we're looking up into the northwest to the elf home, the home of the ascended masters. And so we have to be reminded that any rune, anything that's in the dwarf home, is ideally, in its ideal state, it is dependent upon the elf home for instruction and guidance. The connection there, the communication there, when is our lower self connecting to our, our higher self. And so that means relationship also reflects the relationship of the dwarves to the elves. The dwarves have a self-interest in connecting to the elves. They need something from the elves. When they're disconnected from the elves, that's when people get super selfish. When your lower self is not connected to your higher self. Let me put it to you another way. You can't be involved in selfishness, narcissism, and be connected to your higher self. It's impossible. So ideally, and the lower self needs, like a child, like an animal, it needs to be fed. If you do not feed it with life force energy, if you don't feed it, it rebels because it's hungry, whether for attention, for food, for love, whatever, for boundaries, for guidance. If it doesn't have that, it rebels. And this is where all of our problems come from. Our unconscious and our subconscious mind not serving our higher conscious, either Asgard or the elf home, the celestial gods or the ascended masters. So that's the last thing that I think about here, is that to have, again, to know how to be in relationship, whether it be with the infinite, the divine, the mundane, the human, we have to understand that we don't get into relationship unless we have a need. So I'm going to, since this is a psychological realm, I'm going to get a little psychobabble here for you, which is that this is something that I've perceived. I've talked about this a lot. The martyr that goes around talking about love and light, and I give to everybody, and I'm just about, all I do is give, and they're so syrupy that they're they're just a little bit creepy. Hi, I'm here to love you. That kind of creepy vibe is coming from an unconscious, selfish place. When somebody who has a deep personal need and is, for whatever reason, judging themselves or wasn't allowed to be honest about their needs, then they couch it in this pseudo spirituality. And this is where we end up with the martyrs, the people who, here's one of my favorite phrases that I hear from these kinds of givers, people who give. Listen, I'm one of them too. I'm calling myself out here as well. When people say, I don't ask for much, but as soon as you say, I don't ask for much, I already know the whole story. The whole story is that you spend all of your spare time giving and giving and giving under the guise of, I don't want anything, I'm just a giver, but you really do want something. You want to make them fall in love with you, or you want to make them feel indebted to you, or you want them to, be grateful to you so that they will give back in whatever it is that you want from them. So if you ever catch yourself doing that, I don't ask for much, but guaranteed you're coming from a selfish place. If you find yourself wanting to show somebody how much you can give to them, you know, I shared the example of the friend who wanted to give me a birthday present by waking me up on my birthday and making me breakfast. And my response was, if you really want to give to me on my birthday, let me go back to sleep. I'm tired. Because it was selfish. She had this fantasy of, you know, I was going to be so grateful to her for doing this. And she was all wrapped up in her projection. She wasn't really asking herself, what does Mike want right now? You know, and people do that. They give gifts. They give gifts that they themselves want. Like I heard the story of a guy who's always watching television, and he's a, you know, and of course he's getting in trouble with his girlfriend about he's always watching television, and so for her birthday, he bought her a big widescreen TV. You know, I mean, that wasn't for her, that was for him. Anyway, you get the idea. So the bottom line here is to understand that whenever we see something on the right side, it has to do with our selfish relationship to ourselves. Nothing wrong with that. We have to have it. As you know, I'm very clear about, in order to get the most out of life, you've got to first take care of yourself. You've got to make yourself happy. And you make yourself happy even if it bothers other people. In fact, you have to choose yourself first before others. If people really love you, they're going to accept you. And if you're really truly going after your true self-interest, not, you know, from a lower perspective or a false higher perspective, your true self-interest, you are going to benefit others. People are going to be blessed when you yourself make yourself healthy and happy. So this is one of those runes. JERA is about that. Anyway, that's my take on it for today. So I think that's about it for now. We're coming up on 1 hour here, so I'm going to let this go. I'm seeing, I don't know if it's summertime or whatever it is, but I'm seeing these Patreon, the hits, people who are watching it, there's less and less views. So if there are things that you want me to talk about, I'm not guaranteeing I will, but teach about on this channel, feel free to connect with me via Patreon messaging and put it out there and say, I'd like to hear about this, or I'd like to talk about that. But this is really kind of the study channel, and it's helpful to have, there's two ways to go about working with me. You know, if you're on this channel and you've got, you know, weekly or more, some people are now starting to sign up for more than once a week, once a month. The best way, you know, if you can, have some questions prepared for me. And if you don't have questions, that's okay too. If you don't know, this happens a lot, I don't know what we should be talking about. That gives me a real opportunity to start really looking deeper into your unconscious. And then we can really get some work done. So either way, it doesn't matter. If you have something you really want to know, I'm happy to do that. Don't let I don't know what to talk about with you. Don't let that stop you, because that's really where we start to really get deep. And if you're able to stick with me when we start to really get deep, that's when you're going to see a lot of changes and a lot of power coming to you in your life. So anyway, that's it for now, my friends. If you have any comments or questions, of course, you know where to reach me. In terms of community, I guess I'll stop with this. I can feel that the Patreon community, as well as the thunderwizard.com YouTube community, is wanting to find ways to get together and have groups. So I'm still kind of thinking about, you know, how am I going to do this? Am I going to start having, you know, group seminars or retreats or something like that for Thunder Wizards to come, and I think that's in the future. I'm still mulling it over. I'm happy to continue to talk about it with people if you have ideas or requests. In the meantime, one of the things that I'm recommending that you do, if you want, you don't have to, again, I don't have any rules like that, is to either start teaching your own classes, which, as you know, on the Thunder Wizard YouTube channel, I'm giving people, everybody, free Thunder Wizard certifications for me to go teach, and giving you the materials to do it, or guiding you if you want to create your own curriculum. If you don't want to be a teacher, then have study groups where you get together and do the practices, or you get together and watch the YouTube videos and then discuss it or do them or whatever. This, let the community come and create itself. Listen, I know probably I should take more control, and we're going to do this and that, but I don't want to do that. I have no interest in being, a guru of a giant sect. As I said, if I wanted to, I could create a cult tomorrow. I know exactly what it would take. And I've had people come to me and say, you know what, you could make a ton of money if you did this and this and this. And I know I could. But it just doesn't feed me. It doesn't make me happy. What makes me happy is, again, I want to give to people what I would want for myself. And that's always been what gives me the most joy and happiness. Having said that, you are free to ask me any questions and to, help me by letting me know what you want. But this community, if you're going to be a Thunder Wizard, my experience with life is you have to be proactive with life. You can't let other people do everything for you. You have to want it. So if you want to have a community, a connection, those are my suggestions. Start your own class and teach whatever it is that you know. And that's how another way you learn. That was one of the first things I did when I have a spirit fighting, the martial arts class. As soon as somebody gets the basics and a new student comes in, I have the student go teach him. And I say, you go teach him the first set. And then I'll come and tweak it a little bit, because that's how you learn. You don't know what you know until you start to teach it. So share it with others. So do that, or put study groups together. I don't care, either one, but that would make me happy to see this path taking a life of its own and moving in its own direction. And so there it is. So until next time, my friends, may the power of JERA bring you into relationship not only with your true self, but with the rest of infinity. Thank you.